Fantastic.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of The Package Tourist, hosted by yours truly, The Package Tourist, the magical mystery tour called life, Matthew DiBiase. Tonight's guest is author Jackson van Uden. Jackson lives in Peterborough in Great Britain and works as a historian, political theorist, and content creator. He is the founder of History with Jackson, which began in January 2021, and he is also the Talks Curator of the Katherine of Aragon Festival held at Peterborough Cathedral in the UK. In 2021, Jackson released his first book, The Crystallisation of Totalitarianism, How the 1953 Conference on Totalitarianism Defined the Term, which examines how scholars arrived at the definitions and delineations of what totalitarianism truly is. Then, in 2022, Jackson released his second book, Dictators, which encapsulates in book form a series of talks he gave on dictators on a series released on YouTube. Tonight, we pay tribute to Jackson's writing career and his future projects. Jackson, welcome to the show. It's a great honor and privilege to have you here. I'd like to start off by asking you, Jackson, what led you to specialize in the study of totalitarian regimes? Forgive my tongue twisting, okay?
No, that's right. No, I trip up over that word so many times, so I try to avoid saying it as often as I can whenever I'm doing my work. So, how I kind of arrived at that, as a student, I loved the Wars of the Roses. I wanted to specialise in the Wars of the Roses, which is a series of dynastic conflicts that occurred in England in the mid to late 15th century. But then one day I was doing my essay for a political ideologies module at university, and I came across the 1953 Conference on Totalitarianism book, which was just the proceedings of the conference, everyone's papers, all the notes from the discussions and so on. And I just found it really, really interesting. There was a particular paper by Carl J. Friedrich, which I really, really liked and really, really enjoyed. And I wanted to know more about, how did these people at the conference get to this idea? How did they, develop their thoughts as well? What their backgrounds to historiography? And then from there, I started diving more into Friedrich's work, looking into different definitions by scholars such as Raymond Aron, David D. Roberts, Richard Shorten, and then I wanted to investigate totalitarianism through regimes. How are regimes totalitarian? Does the concept extend out of the 20th century into the 21st century, looking at different theories from scholars such as Sheldon Woolen and other people like that. So it was basically through chance by finding a conference proceedings on the shelf of a very small university in England, because we had an excellent librarian, really.
Okay. Now, how long did it take you to write your first book, The Crystallization of Totalitarianism? How long did it take?
Yeah, so my first book was essentially my undergrad dissertation. And because I got so interested in it, I vastly exceeded the word count. So the word count was 10,500, and I went substantially over that. So it took me about a year and a half worth of researching to look at the historiography, track down people, work with archives to find more information. Submit the dissertation in a year, and then the other half of the year was fine-tuning it, putting back several thousand words that are missing from the original dissertation, and then publishing it. So it took me a good year and a half, but it was a great process, and I still love that conference, even though very few other people actually care about it. It is a niche that I'm very passionate about.
Okay, Jackson. Why was there such a conference in 1953, and what were the factors that led to the conference being convened? And where was the conference held?
Yeah, so the conference was held at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in Massachusetts. So it was quite the conference emerges at this point where we've we've kind of passed a high point of totalitarianism. The Nazi regime has faded away. It actually occurs on the day it actually begins on the day that Stalin dies. So it kind of does happen at the end of the golden age of totalitarianism, if you can call anything like that a golden age, and you begin to see Eastern Europe descend into this kind of Stalinist style of communism. So, but it occurs at this pivotal moment in history, really, where the great totalitarian leaders have gone. Mao's still kicking about in China, but that golden age of the era is gone, and you have a set of scholars who really want to define the period of history that has just occurred. But also, it was an era of history where you start using terms without fully understanding what they are. And I think we do that today as well, where we start talking about regimes being tyrannical, being dictatorial, being autocratic, being totalitarian without having a true understanding of the term. And I think these academics coming together, discussing what totalitarianism is, created the kind of conditions where we understand what totalitarianism is in the context of the mid-20th century.
Who were the guiding lights in that conference, the key voices, the most influential voices in that conference?
Yeah, so for me, the most important voice at that conference is Carl J. Friedrich. He is the organizer and the chair of the conference. And what his paper outlines five characteristics of totalitarianism, which largely shape the characterizing and the defining of the term for the succeeding 50 years. So Carl J. Friedrich is certainly the leading light of the conference, but then you have other people who are there in discussion or adding their notes afterwards. So Hannah Arendt, from Origins of Totalitarianism fame, she is also adding her thoughts to the discussion. Zbigniew K. Brzezinski, former national security advisor for the US, was studying under Friedrich, and he was there as a note taker for the conference, and he later worked with Friedrich on a book about totalitarianism 10 years later. So, it's an incredibly important moment in history, and I definitely think it's underrated. I would, of course, say that I've written a book on it. But Carl J. Friedrich is certainly the leading light. Brzezinski being there is significant. Arendt adding her thoughts is significant. And then you have people like Karl Deutsch, Waldemar Guerin, who are fantastic scholars who went off to shape different theories, Deutocracy and the cult of personality, who are also there as well.
What was Carl Friedrich's nationality? Was he American, German? What was his nationality?
Yeah, so actually that's a fantastic point. A huge number of people at this conference were refugees from Germany. They fled the Nazi regime, either because they're intelligentsia, they were communist, they had Jewish descent. So there's a huge number of people at this conference who are defining totalitarianism based off an experience of totalitarianism, particularly a German experience. And that is one of the criticisms of the conference as well, and their definition, that it's a very German Nazi-centric definition. It doesn't really take into account, Jerzy G. Glicksman doesn't really take in a communist perspective of totalitarianism.
In terms of, you talk about a Germanic view of totalitarianism, as years and decades pass, are there also other permutations based upon nationality, like Oriental totalitarianism or African totalitarianism, or even Hispanic or Latino totalitarianism? Can ethnicity add different colors to totalitarianism based on your research? Have you come across such things, or no?
So, based off my research, there has been different kind of theories based off different experiences, but totalitarianism is quite a narrow thing. Very few regimes have been truly totalitarian. So whilst Wikipedia might say like 50 countries have been totalitarian, 50 regimes have, I disagree with that. So, this conference and Friedrich give a very German perspective, but in 1964, when Friedrich and Brzezinski write their second definition, they add more characteristics into that. It goes from 5 to 6, but those 6 are a bit broader. And based off Brzezinski's Polish communist experience, there's more in there. So it starts to become more international. Lev Gudkov, in 2001, a Russian scholar who experienced the Soviet Union, creates his own definition, largely similar to Friedrich's, but yes, more shaped by that communist Soviet experience. Richard Shawson creates one in the early 2000s, discussing totalitarianism based off ideology, different ideological traits that he noticed in Italy, in Germany, in Russia. Raymond Aron who's a French philosopher and political scientist, does the same in the 60s as well. So you begin to have a more internationally shaped definition from the 60s onwards. But a lot of these ideas about totalitarianism stem from a German experience, stem from a Russian experience. And, in my master's dissertation, something that I'm looking at trying to share a little bit wider, I come up with a 21st century definition of it, which is largely shaped by what's occurring in China now under Xi Jinping. And I can foresee, after the demise of Xi Jinping, we might have more Chinese or Asian shaped definitions of either totalitarianism, autocracy, or authoritarianism.
Can you name a couple, just 2 or 3 core characteristics of totalitarianism? Because you said this conference tried to arrive at some core standards, some common characteristics. Can you name like 2 or 3 common characteristics?
Yeah. So what largely happens at this conference is there's a clash between scholars, and two scholars who clash the most are Carl J. Friedrich and Alex Enceles. And Alex Enceles starts talking about this mystique of totalitarianism, but Friedrich emerges, I think, in a stronger position from this debate, and he defines totalitarianism from 5 characteristics, but the characteristics that are supported the most by other participants are a system of terror enacted arbitrarily against the citizens of that country, and then a cult of personality created around a dictator.
Yeah.
And I think those are the 2 most pivotal, because you outline that you have a dictator and that there's some form of hero worship around them. But then also you have a system of terror which props up the regime, which supports the regime, which the system of monopoly of arms and a system of monopoly of communications also support.
Okay. Now let's move on to your second book. Please tell our listeners about your second book, Dictators.
Yeah, so Dictators was largely stemming from my work into totalitarianism, and I kind of wanted to explain why 5 dictators, or 5 or 6 dictators, it's been a long time since I've looked at that book, were dictators and were totalitarians. So we were looking at Hitler, Stalin, Mao, and a couple of others, and how they were defined as totalitarians. So I worked through the 6 characteristics, and looking at their monopoly of arms, their monopoly of communications, and how that evidence supports the idea that they are totalitarian dictators. It was based off, as you said earlier, those YouTube lectures that I did very early in my content career, and it's something that I'm very passionate about as well. And it's been largely been the backbone for a lot of my research since then.
When you talk about cult of personality and also ideology and all that, would it be accurate to say a lot, especially with Hitler, Stalin, and Mao, it was very much the ideology of the self? In other words, ideology is what that specific dictator states at a given moment of time. Very ad hoc and very capricious, and it can be changed at any moment. Is that an accurate depiction based on your research?
Yes. So you end up within totalitarian regimes kind of being at the whim of the dictator, which partly comes into that monopoly of communications, where that dictator can distribute any information they want within a framework that they believe is the right thing, and that forms part of a body of doctrine that supports what that leader wants to go off and do. So Hitler with Mein Kampf, we see people who studied totalitarianism and to study the regimes see Mein Kampf as that body of doctrine which supports the ideology. So when you go through Mein Kampf, you can see a lot of the ideas which shape the Nazi ideology. When final days of Lenin, and during the political turmoil between Lenin's death and the ascension of Stalin, Stalin takes over a foundation which looks after Lenin's ideological thoughts. And then Stalin puts together a set of lectures called the Foundations of Leninism, which largely shape how he proposes to govern the Soviet Union if he was to rise to leader. So, again, we have a shape of work which Stalin is using as something to leap off. Mao Zedong does the same with the quotations of Mao Zedong, which again, a set of quotes, a set of ideas which support what he wants to do. But he can also, through that monopoly of communications, can get rid of things he no longer agrees with. Stalin can do it, Hitler can do it, and they can shape what they want to do at that moment. So if Mao Zedong has a quotation that he doesn't agree with anymore, he can strike that out of that document. And again, it's no longer there. People can't look at that and question that. The Kim regime in North Korea largely does the same, where they get rid of documentation, which is counter to how they're operating at that point.
Yeah. Jackson, some months ago, I finished reading, I don't know, have you ever read Richard D. Carter's trilogy on Mao Zedong, which I thought was a magnificent piece of work? What I noticed was...
I just got to hear.
Yeah. I noticed after the death of Stalin, Mao, especially after Khrushchev gave his immortal speech condemning Stalin's crimes, Mao was very... I wouldn't say obsessed, but absolutely determined to create his own brand of communism. And after Khrushchev's speech and all that, you start seeing Mao's Thousand Flowers campaign, and then especially the Great Leap Forward, and then even more ominous, the infamous Cultural Revolution, which were all personal extensions of his personal singular vision of what he thought communism should be. I mean, do you see that too, that intense personalization? In other words, my form of communism must endure as opposed to other forms of communism, or whatever their ideological underpinnings are. Do you observe that?
Yes, so, firstly, I've met Frank, I know Frank, and Frank's work is absolutely phenomenal. And particularly his book, Dictators, the Cult of Personality in the 20th Century, is pivotal work within the field of cult of personality. And you're very right. There was those discussions between Mao and Stalin, where Stalin was essentially the elder statesman, the elder figure within communism, because he was a revolutionary figure, a person who had put together or supported the rise of communism within Russia, within the Soviet Union. And that position gave him that kind of kudos to shape, but also the support that he'd offered to China, the support he'd offered to Mao, created that balance of relationship. When Stalin passes away, it presents Mao an opportunity to kind of break free from the shackles of Russian-orientated communism. And of course, the conditions in Russia and China are very different, and their needs are very different. There's massive industrialization in Russia, and therefore their communism needs to be centered around an industrial working class. But when you're trying to impose that on China, which is largely a non-industrialized agrarian society, Mao needs to make sure he makes those changes to support his own form of communism. And you can see those debates happening in the Comintern, where Stalin falls out with Tito and other Eastern European dictators because he's trying to enforce a style of communism which doesn't particularly work in their particular Eastern Bloc nation. So, yes, you have a hierarchy, particularly solidified during the Comintern, which is the Communist International body. But then upon Stalin's death, you have a lot of leaders trying to break free from those shackles and establish something that works best within there. And Khrushchev's de-Stalinization speech, exposing some of the evils of Stalin's regime, is particularly powerful and provides an opportunity for people like Mao to assert themselves.
Okay. Jackson, please tell our listeners, where can they find your series of lectures on YouTube that led to this book being published? Where can they find it?
So my YouTube channel is History with Jackson, and they're a fair way behind some of the first videos that I did, but they're there on the videos tab of the YouTube channel. But there are also some of the first podcasts that were released on the History of Jackson podcast. So that podcasts their numbers, I'm pretty sure they're below 50, and we're up at over 200 episodes now. So you do have to go way back to find them.
Okay. Now, the book Dictators, are they the transcripts of your lectures, Jackson?
So yes, I did originally take the transcripts, but then I went back and edited them and added little bits of information in, which I originally didn't put within a 10-minute video.
Ooh, okay.
So there's a little bit of additional information in there as well, stemming from other research that I did afterwards.
Now, while I was looking at your profile on LinkedIn, I noticed, and it states you have a keen interest in sports history, especially with regards to football, quote-unquote, American people, soccer in Eastern Europe during the Cold War. Rather esoteric taste. What led you to this interest, Jackson?
So I'm a massive sports fan. I played sports most of my life. I watch sports whenever I can in my free time. I'm big NFL fan, big rugby fan, NHL fan, all that stuff. And part of my work at university was, trying to look around and diversify what I can do. And I developed a very keen interest based off the game Football Manager and Eastern European football, particularly soccer football in Bulgaria, owing to my support of a very small team called PFC Montana 1921. And from there I found out about the mighty Magyars, the Hungarian team during the 50s, and looking at how successful they are. And from there, my interest in Eastern European Cold War football really grew, because you have some fantastic club sides who are performing exceptionally well on the international stage, or at least the continental stage. And there's various different dynamics in there. A lot of football across Europe is not professionalised. It's either semi-professional or amateur. And you have, although officially, an amateur setup in Eastern European countries like Bulgaria, like Hungary, like Russia. You actually have the influence of the army and the secret police and senior politicians in supporting their sides. You have a lot of sides which become the army side. Very good footballers from other sides are recruited in the army solely to play for these teams. You have the secret police doing the same thing as well, drafting people in from the army to join the secret police so they play for their side. You have them drafting people from other teams to become members of the secret police and just play football. So their role is not to be a member of the secret police investigating people or be a member of the army and going off to war. Their job is actually to go and play football 5 days a week for these sides to help develop the prestige of the secret police and the army, but also to develop the prestige of the nation against the West, to prove that their ways are better than the West.
So in a sense, interesting, kind of right, because I remember I've always been fascinated by Olympic history, and it was, of course, especially during the Cold War with the Russia and the Eastern European nations, especially East Germany, the athletes were ideological extensions. So when you're based on your interest, are you seeing the same thing, these soccer players as these teams as ideological extensions of these Eastern European communist regimes?
It's certainly on a continental basis as both national sides and club sides. When some of these teams go off to play British teams, English teams. It's certainly an attempt to assert the benefits of communism, and same with the Hungarian side going up playing the World Cups. It's an opportunity to show the benefits of communism against the West. So it's certainly, as I agree with you, it is an extension of those ideological battles that are occurring in many different forums, not just sport, but they're occurring in film, they're occurring in art, they're occurring in music, architecture. It is very much a staple of that Cold War.
Closer to home, are you in the Premier League?
Yes, I am into the Premier League. My favourite team is Arsenal. We're doing quite well. It's the only one of my teams which is doing quite well. For my sins, I'm a New York Jets fan as well.
You poor lad! You poor lad!
Pretty horrid this year. I was very excited when Aaron Rodgers signed last year, and now I'm not so excited. But hopefully, with a new GM, a new head coach, we're going to do a lot better next season.
Don't hold your breath, dear friend. Don't hold your breath.
I've got used to not holding it.
But the thing is, Liverpool, I presume, is still way ahead in Premier League, correct?
We'll be able to catch them. They'll fall apart. They're going to have their star players head off to Real Madrid. Once Real Madrid comes calling, you can't turn away. So hopefully, a couple of unsettled players within that dressing room will allow us to storm on right ahead if Mikel Arteta and the board sign a striker. So hopefully we get there.
Tell me, wasn't Arsene Wenger the head coach of Arsenal for a long time? Didn't he do great work with the team? What was he like as a coach, Arsene Wenger?
Yeah, so Arsene Wenger was coach of Arsenal for 18 years.
A long time, especially at Premier League.
Yeah, incredibly long. I think him and Sir Alex Ferguson was head coach for like 24 years. Manchester United, and he brought in a very, very attractive style of playing football, which is what we all expect now from Arsenal. Beautiful flowing football, but also he made us a more international team. So we were the first team in the Premier League to field a starting 11 with not a single British player in. So he also started this kind of internationalisation to the extent that he did of the Premier League, and we ended up having players like Thierry Henry, my favourite ever player ever. That was a bit of a tongue twister. Dennis Bergkamp, Patrick Vieira. That team under Arsene Wenger certainly established the Premier League in its current guise.
Okay, let's talk about yourself now. Please tell our listeners, what is History with Jackson, and what are its objectives? How often do you broadcast? What evenings? What's the objective of your podcast, History with Jackson?
Yeah, so History of Jackson is an online learning platform. So we do our online history platform, and we create content on various different historical periods, but through various different mediums. So we do a lot of video work on our Instagram and TikTok, presenting at historical sites, historical institutions, historical festivals, looking to share history in a more accessible and digestible way, because we understand not everyone can get to these festivals, not everyone can visit these sites, not everyone can experience some of the things we're able to experience. So making it accessible for people so they can get to learn about it a little bit and hopefully be able to visit it at some point. Then we also have the podcast, which breaks history down again into more accessible and digestible chunks, so that people can start to learn from historians about their specialism. So we view historians on their book every week, and hopefully teach people a little bit about what they're working on. So we've spoken to academics about ancient Egypt. We've spoken about the January 6th insurrection. So we do a wide spread of history and seek to break it down so people can get it understand it a little bit more. If they want to go and buy the book, they can go and buy the book. If they've learned what they needed to learn, they can just listen to the episode, or move on to the next if not particularly interested. So that's what we try to do here at History of Jackson. We also have a blog as well, so young and up and coming historians can actually have a go at experimenting with their writing, but also sharing with a new audience. Because once I was in the position where I didn't know where to share my work, I didn't know go and learn these things. By creating a platform where people can come try these things out, share their audience or share their work with an audience that is bigger than theirs, hopefully I'm doing my bit that I didn't have when I started off.
Well, if you're ever interested in having a sports historian on your show, I'm all in, because I have 4 books of sports history myself, and I'm working on 2 which will hopefully come out next year, God willing, and all that. If you're ever interested, Jackson. Okay.
Oh, I love sport, mate. Can't knock it. And with the Super Bowl coming soon as well, no better times to be writing about sport.
Okay. Now, please tell our listeners, what is the Katherine of Aragon Festival? When is it held, and why is it held, Jackson?
So, today, January 29th, I've just passed over over midnight.
Yeah.
It's the final day of the Katherine of Aragon Festival. So, Katherine of Aragon was one of the wives of Henry VIII.
First wife.
He was her second. Yeah. His first wife. He was her second husband. And Katherine of Aragon was buried in Peterborough. So every year we have a festival to commemorate Katherine of Aragon's life. And I'm from Peterborough. I feel remarkably passionate about broadcasting Peterborough's history to the world and making sure that I help my city become it, and giving people the opportunity to experience history, which they might not have always been able to access in Peterborough. Peterborough is one of the places in the country which has one of the lowest wages or the biggest wealth discrepancies. So by working to share that, I can hopefully help inspire a next generation of historians. So the festival this year went on from the 22nd to the 29th of January, commemorating Catherine's life through living history experiences, performances from living historians, but also an extensive talks program this year, which I did curate across the weekend, 25th and 26th of January.
I'm curious, where exactly is Peterborough in Great Britain? How is it close to London, or is it further north, like close to Liverpool and Manchester? Where exactly is it, Jackson?
So it's in East Anglia. So when you look at Britain, you kind of have the bum part, if the only way to explain.
Yeah.
And where the curve comes in, you have this little dip.
Yeah.
We're about a thumb inland, which is about 45 minutes north by train, because obviously we have a really good high-speed network, so I can get to London in 45 minutes from here. So we're just north of London, 100 miles north of London. I think half an hour north by car from Cambridge. So it's incredibly...
Okay. So you already said you were born and raised in Peterborough. Where did you go to university?
So actually I was born in Nottingham.
Oh, okay.
Which is further north. No, I was born in Nottingham. So I spent some time in Nottingham, moved down to Peterborough when I was 5, 6.
Okay.
So I've lived here for 20 years, but I went to my first university was in Chichester, which is on the south coast, not far away from Portsmouth or Southampton, which were major naval bases for most of English history. Yeah. So Chichester was the sunniest uni in the UK. Which is really nice when you're 20 minutes away from a beach. Did love that when I was like 19, 20, 21. And then I went off and learned did a teaching qualification, and then went to the University of Birmingham for masters.
Okay, that's Midlands.
Holloway in London for a PhD.
Now Birmingham, that's Midlands, right?
Yes, Midlands. Yeah, so that's West Midlands. Peterborough's East Midlands, so it wasn't that far. It was like an hour and a half in the car.
Jackson, whenever I interview an author, I always love to ask the standard question. When you were growing up, who were your favorite authors? And of those favorite authors, did any of them inspire you to become a writer or perhaps influence your personal writing style?
So it's a big one, really, because I didn't really have favorite authors. I didn't wait for an author to release a book. What I did enjoy was series of books. So I really enjoy the Percy Jackson series of books, which obviously most people will know. But the other ones that people might not quite be aware of were Robert Muchmore's Henderson's Boys and Cherub, which were a series about people who were about my age at that time, when I was about secondary school, middle and senior high school age, where they were like child spies conducting clandestine missions behind, Henderson Boys was conducting clandestine missions in World War II behind enemy lines, and Cherub, which was set in the modern day 2000s, and they were running, child spies working to bring down drug networks or something. And they were really, really quite fun. But the historical basis of Henderson Boys and Percy Jackson really helped, foster my love of history. But then since I've gotten older, and I've started meeting some of the historians whose work that I did read when I was, developing my skills as a historian, it's probably Frank Dicotta. I don't often get starstruck when I meet these historians because obviously it's my job. I see them pretty much every day. I work and write and interview quite a lot of them. But when I met Frank Dicotta, I was like, wow, I can't believe I'm actually meeting this man. So it's those kind of childhood books fostered the love. But meeting people like Frank Dicotta has been real moments for me.
Have you met that guy? His last name is Kotkin, who's written 2 magnificent volumes on Stalin. I'm waiting for his 3rd volume that finishes up Stalin's life. Have you met Kotkin?
No, I haven't met Kotkin. I have got a few of his books though. I tend, because I go to a lot of British history festivals, I tend to meet more British historians. Okay. Good friends with Giles Milton, whose recent book, The Stalin Affair, is absolutely awesome. I cannot recommend that book enough. Also, Steve Tibble, really good friends with Steve Tibble, and his recent books into the Crusades and the Templars are absolutely fantastic as well. It's been really nice becoming friends with people like that and reading their books and speaking to them about their books because their research is so different to some of the research I've been doing recently.
Yes. Jackson, please tell our listeners, where can readers find your books?
Yes, so they're available on Amazon if you just search Jackson van Uden. Van Uden is V-A-N, different word, U-D-E-N. They will turn up. But then also you can keep up to date with all my content on @HistoryWithJackson on Instagram or TikTok.
Last question, Jackson. What is your next book project and when can we expect its release?
So at the moment, I'm about to start a PhD in September. So the book will probably be coming out in about 4 or 5 years. But my PhD is looking at Trump and Trump's role as a leader, which I'm particularly excited to get stuck into. The only thing daunting, and it is also a benefit as well, is just the sheer amount of sources that this man's going to create over the next 4 years. Already over the past 3 weeks, this man has created enough sources to keep me going for 4 years. So I can't imagine how much he's going to give me over the next 4.
Well, I hope, personally, forgive me for saying this, but I hope it doesn't last 4 years for the sake of the world, for a lot of the sake of innocent people. Because I have to live with them, and you're lucky you don't have to live with them.
Unfortunately, we have to live with the fallout, don't we? So
I know. But I'm closer to the cauldron than you are, my dear friend. Jackson, I want to thank you so very, very much for appearing on the show. And let me know when your next book does come out. I want you on my show again.
Will do, mate. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
You take care. Take care. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you, mate.
Bye. Stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen, for next week's show where I will be interviewing author John Bruning. Thank you and good night.